And joining us now on The Debate, in New York City, Ato Kwesen, Professor of English and Director of the Center for Diaspora and Transnational Studies at the University of Toronto. And with us here in studio, Essie Adujan, author of the 2011 Giller Prize-winning novel, Half-Blood Blues. Donna Bailey Nurse, literary journalist and author of What's a Black Critic to Do? Quam McKenzie, Professor of Psychiatry at U of T and CAMH. And Dwayne Morgan, poet and founder of Up From the Roots Entertainment. Welcome to you all. Welcome back to some of you. Thank you for coming in. I want to kick off our discussion by reading a quotation. This is comes from a website called The Root. It was written by a woman named Alison Ronaldo, a black Canadian of Caribbean descent. Here's what she wrote this past April. We were literally Guyanese, or Jamaican and Trini, if our parents hailed from two different countries. It was absolutely unheard of for anyone of my ilk to claim Canada. After all, what really was being Canadian? Yes, you were born here and lived here all of your life, but everything, absolutely everything, from your table etiquette to your family pride was figuratively imported. There was no anchor here, nothing to claim, at least not the way our parents claimed back home, or the way the white majority claimed, well, essentially everywhere. We Canadian-born blacks were not established, therefore we had no reason to feel pride, or so it appeared. Dwayne, let's start off with you. You were born in this country. Yes. You've lived here your whole life. Has this been your experience?
That very much has been my experience. I think, when I still think about identity, you still look at, both of my parents are Jamaican, so you think of, Jamaica and all of the things, the foods, the culture, that sort of thing. And really, in Canada, you only look at yourself really as being Canadian. A lot of times, when the Olympics and things happen, then you see somebody who's black, who looks like you, who wins, and they might have been born someplace else, but then you still cheer and you still have that, they might still be from Trinidad or from wherever. So you have all those, community and cultural groups who still rally around those people. But, going through school and just living life, you've never really felt embraced as a part of this country. When I travel overseas, people never look at me and say, this guy must be Canadian. They always ask me, are you American or something else? And so it's one of those things where I still don't see myself reflected in this is what Canada looks like.
Donna, let me ask you about that, because is it an experience that's exclusive to black Canadians, or is it an experience that's exclusive to many people with colored skin in this country?
First of all, I just want to say that I don't necessarily feel that way. I do feel my parents are Jamaican and I'm born here. But I still feel very Canadian. I do feel Jamaican, but I also feel very Canadian as well. No, I don't think it's, I don't actually think it's restricted only to black Canadians either, because, or Canadians of color, the feeling that you don't belong, because, I interviewed different people, and one woman I interviewed, Camilla Gibb, a writer who's born in Britain, and she still says, she doesn't really feel Canadian. She grew up thinking that Canadians were people who went to the cottage and played tennis, and she didn't do those things, and so she believes she really wasn't Canadian, and she still doesn't really feel attached to the landscape. So I'm not sure that's just something that defines us specifically.
Where do you fit into this, Essie? Because you were born in Calgary, you live in Victoria. When you identify, how do you feel attached to this country, or not for that matter?
I feel very Canadian through and through. I mean, of course, there are situations where, you feel as though other people are looking at you and they're not, they're thinking, well, this is an African, you look very African. But no, I very much feel deeply Canadian, and especially when I go abroad. And I know there is that situation where some people are looking at you and thinking, that's not what I would think a typical Canadian looks like. But this is when I get, I go Canadian with a vengeance, and this is my country, and I'm very proud.
Quam, I want to ask you, because you've lived in both the United States and in Canada, what's the difference between being black in Canada and the U.S.?
Well, it's an interesting question. I know that the old joke is that Canadian is an American with the batteries taken out. That's what they say. And that's the interesting thing about that joke, is that it defines Canadian, sort of African Canadians relative to Americans, whereas people are completely different histories, different reasons for being here, and it's a very different thing being a black Canadian than it is being a black American. 13% against 4%, visibility against relative invisibility, very long history against groups, some groups who've got a very long history, a lot of groups who've got a lot of shorter history. Black president versus sort of nobody at that level currently
Leadership.
sitting. Yeah. So there's all of those differences, but I do think that it's part of what happens in Canada that people do compare themselves to America, and I think that's problematic when you've got 30 million people on one side who are African American and 500,000 people on the other side who are African Canadian.
We Canadians are always comparing ourselves to the
Yes.
American, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Atto, you've lived in the UK, you're in the US today, you've spent time here in Canada, you live here now. Tell me about the differences of experience being black in various countries.
There's lots of differences. I grew up in Ghana and spent some 15 years in the UK. I've traveled widely, and of course I'm now based in Boston temporarily, but mainly in Canada. And the only way I can explain the difference, and the difference is also a difference of sentiment, of feeling, is through an anecdote. While I was in teaching in the UK, I used to travel a lot, so it took me through Heathrow Airport at least 3 to 4 times a year on travels. And every time when I was coming to the airport, that is re-entering the country, there was a little bit of anxiety about what kinds of questions they would ask me. And indeed, they often asked me, even though my visa I was a permanent resident and everything, they frequently asked me questions that implied that perhaps I was out of place. But contrast this with, I moved to Canada, again I continue my travels, and the first time I leave and I'm re-entering through Pearson, I hand over my passport to the young man at the immigration, and he looks through, everything is fine. Then he hands over the passport back to me, and he says, welcome home. Of course, I'm flabbergasted. In fact, I do a double take. I look behind me, wondering whether it's me he's addressing. But it turns out that this is not the only time that I've been welcomed home to Canada at point of entry. So the contrast is 15 years in the UK, always feeling a sense of slight edginess and unbelonging re-entering the place. And then here, I'm welcomed home. So it's purely at the level of sentiment. So I'm not a Canadian citizen yet, but I'm looking forward to being that one day. We
look forward to having you as one of our citizens. Okay, in North America, more than any other minority group, blacks are portrayed in popular culture. And Donna, I want to ask you, many films and books and poems have told the stories of African Americans during the civil rights movement in so many different ways. Why are those pieces important?
Well, I think we want to keep those stories alive. And I think that, we want to make sure we have young audiences for them. And so we want to present them in ways that young people can still relate. But I think the main thing is we just want to keep telling them from different perspectives. And I think one of the things we don't realize is that there's so much we still don't know. So my whole thing that I'm interested in is, keeping the conversation going from different perspectives and letting people realize that, we don't know as much as we think we know.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, a lot of people complain about Black History Month. I never complain about it because I can't wait to know more. There's very few opportunities to hear as much as we hear during Black History Month, and even if it's just for me, I want to know more. I read a lot, and it doesn't seem to matter how much I read. I read for a living, and when I'm reading Black books, especially historical pieces, I learn something new. I could tell you I learned something new with every book. So there's an awful lot we don't know, and I just want people to be open to that.
I remember an interesting thing about that, because I think Black History Month is important. But I remember going to a school, and I went to a school full of 13 to 16-year-olds, a lot of them who are black, and this was in the UK. And I said, what do you think about Black History Month? And they said, we can't stand it. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, it comes to Black History Month, and everybody talks about slavery and the American Civil Rights Movement. And that's all we hear about. We actually don't hear about black history, and we don't hear about ourselves, and we don't hear about our culture. And so I tested that out a little bit in sort of some Canadian schools, and some of the kids were saying exactly the same thing. They're saying, we hear about American history, we hear about slavery, but what do we hear about contemporary Canadian black history? Where are we, you know? And I think that's important because there's an evolution, I think, that there can be in this idea of Black History Month.
I also think, if you don't mind, I also think, though, that there is a sense, for me anyways, that black history, black experience is an international experience. And so I think I wish it was more international, not just focused so much on the States and that one experience, but it isn't, and I want there to be a sense of it being an international experience, because let's face it, wherever we go in the world, Africa or anywhere, there's still a black experience, and I think that's really important to...
We're going to parse this as we go along a little bit more, but Essie, I want to ask you, because your book, Half-Blood Blues, is about the experience of black jazz musicians during the Third Reich in Germany. What about that black experience piqued your interest?
Well, first and foremost, at the heart of the book is a character called Hieronymus Falk, he's actually a German, a young man of Afro-German descent, so, you know, a mother from the Rhineland and a father who was a Senegalese soldier, you know, for France, and who, you know, was basically one of the soldiers who was policing the Rhineland at that time. And that to me was so fascinating because this was a history that I hadn't heard of before. Just utterly fascinating. And as Donna was saying, I mean, anywhere you go in the world, there is, you know, there is a population of people of African descent.
Obviously, your book is set in a very different time. But what did you learn about the difference between you, a black Canadian, and being a black person in Europe in writing this book?
Well, I guess maybe just to talk about my contemporary experiences, I found that there was a lot of, in some ways, there was more similarity between being an African Canadian and being, you know, an African, you know, European than there is between being an African American and African Canadian, just in terms of my experience, because, you know, especially being from out west, it's such a tiny population, and so there isn't this, you know, huge sense of community, at least for myself. And so, yeah, I did, you know, meet a lot of people where there was sort of this shared commonality of this, you know, almost like you know, you're sort of, yeah, just being very, you know, not having this huge sense of community, and you know, feeling rather different because of it, but also feeling, in some ways, more part of the fabric of you know, of where you're living, in some ways, just because you know, there isn't something constantly, you know, there isn't this constant juxtaposition maybe between, you know, this is sort of the, you know, black culture and this is Canadian culture. The two felt much more.
I want to talk about someone who gets talked about a lot in the media, and it's Tyler Perry. Dwayne, just for people who don't know, tell us, who is Tyler Perry?
All right, well, Tyler Perry is a writer. I mean, he started off putting on plays and inspirational gospel musical type of plays. And it was those kind of plays that would be, you know, the off-Broadway type of play that were, you know, the people in the community would really go out and support these plays because it was the first time that they saw people who looked like them, speaking like them, singing the songs that they heard in church, all of those kinds of things. So it wasn't the what we know as, you know, the theater, but it was this kind of community theater kind of thing. And he branched out from that into then selling those plays on DVD, and from that being able to make enough money to transition into now being able to put those plays into film. And I think, yeah, I mean, everybody has, you know, their take on him. I think he's been in...
You're a fan.
You know, I'm a...
Not of his work, but of what the importance of the work he's doing.
Yeah, I'm very entrepreneurial minded, so I'm definitely a fan of how he was able to take this idea and start at the grassroots level and build it into what it is today, where now, you know, instead of knocking on Hollywood's door, he can produce anything that he wants because he has created that from the community, from the ground up.
Okay, I want to play a little bit of tape that shows Tyler Perry. This is him, something called Medea Goes to Jail. This is from 2009. Let's take a look at that.
Young man, who you think you're talking to, old lady? You don't know me. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Now get the hell up from the table and go on now.
I see nobody told you I run this prison. I'm Big Sal. And what Big Sal wants, Big Sal gets.
I guess nobody told you that I'm Madea. Mud to the damn D-E-A. You understand that? And what I want, I get. I'm from the West End. That's where we cut up food first and run like hell afterwards.
Okay, Kwam, forget, aside from the fact that we have two men cross-dressing there, it's Tyler Perry sort of plays this, stereotype of a loud, brash, black women. Is that how you see it when you see that piece of tape?
I see that piece of tape, and I see an entrepreneur who's making a lot of money. That's what he does. And if he wasn't black and he was making, how can I put it, movies that identify or try to get money out of a certain demographic, everybody would say, hey, well, that's what he does, and he makes his money. And it's the same with Tyler Perry. Those are people who are going to be offended by it, and part of the reason people are going to be offended by it is because of the stereotype of the brash, angry black woman. But the reason why he gets into trouble is because there aren't enough other visions of black women that are sitting on the big screens, and that's where he gets into trouble. So his problem is he wants to make money, and everybody thinks he should be making money while having a social conscience and while trying to right the wrongs that actually have to be owned by the Hollywood in general, not just Tyler Perry.
Adam, what do you think of Tyler Perry? Because again, sorry, go ahead.
I honestly haven't followed. I've read a lot about him. In fact, I read up on the material you sent us yesterday. That was sent to us yesterday. What I gather is that there is a stereotype of sassiness and buffoonery, which he has deployed to good use. And I don't think we should quarrel with him. He's not reflecting. He's reflecting a particular kind of blackness which sells, and he's been very successful at it. There are two problems though. One is a certain flatness and predictability, so that even though it might be reflecting some aspect of black women, it is so flat and predictable that with time it becomes just a mere mode of stereotyping, because that is not how all black women are. That's the first thing. The second thing is that once people become attached to that image, they are satisfied with mediocrity. Because in fact, once the stereotype is flat, or once the image is flat and it is put into circulation and it becomes popular, it actually banalizes the taste of the consumer. So the social conscience bit is not so much the fact that he is producing an overly narrow representation of blackness, but that in fact he's banalizing the taste bud of the consumer, black or white. So I think that would be the criticism.
Dwayne, go ahead.
My thing, though, is that, Madea is his most popular character that he has created, but all of his movies don't have Madea in them. Yeah. So he actually does have movies that have people from the community in very different situations, very different roles, and Madea is his comedic character that he plays in some of his movies. But
the pushback, though, Dwayne, is that it's not just Tyler Perry that uses that stereotype. And I want to pick up what Kwam was saying earlier, that there seems to be in mass media the portrayal of the black woman as a caricature almost, or a reflection of just one kind of black woman. Isn't that a problem?
Can I in fact interrupt, if I may?
Go ahead, Ato, and then I'll go to Dwayne.
I'm sorry, because I'm sort of blind to what you guys are doing there. But Jamie Foxx has a show. It's called the Jamie Foxx Show, and it's a comedy show. And I've seen it a couple of times, and I always wonder why someone of Jamie Foxx's talent as an actor, because we all know he's very talented, is satisfied with being a buffoon on TV, because that's his image. There's nothing but pure slapstick buffoonery, and I wonder what he is serving in terms of his own remarkable talent And this also shows that he has himself flattened his talent in order to quote unquote make money. And of course, if he makes money with people, some people are happy with it. But I think that should not be enough motivation. Switching to Jamie Foxx, for someone of such remarkable talent.
I really have to say, like, I really disagree with a lot of what's being said. First of all, because I think a lot of these, first of all, with Tyler Perry, one of the reasons why I don't mind his work and sometimes like his work is because he actually has enormous affection for black women. And he has enormous affection for their experiences. And if you ever see Diary of a Mad Black Woman, that's a beautiful piece. Kimberly Elise is amazing in that. And often his work, I don't know what he's trying to do, and I admit that. He's trying to show a certain kind of black humor that he's not the only person who does it. I think it's actually a tradition. You know, we might point to something like Groucho Marx or the Three Stooges or something he's doing, and he's binding it together with a more serious storyline. He's always got these two things going on. I'm not saying it works, but it works better in the Diary of a Mad Black Woman. And I don't want to hear that he's saying that he's making a fool of black women, because really very few black men and any filmmakers have produced such beautiful women characters. Not the buffoonery, not Medea. She's one character, but there's also some really other lovely black women characters. He has a soft spot in his heart for black women. That's absolutely true.
I want to go to you yes. Dwayne, because you want to say something a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was really just a kind of, piggybacking on that, just really just saying that he does have, a lot of other portrayals of the community that aren't just that, typical, stereotypical thing. And people love Medea because when he was doing the plays started with Medea. Medea was the main character in the plays that people, came to love because, in that American context, everybody had a Medea in their family. So, But
again, I go back to the point that Kwame made earlier, that we always see that type of character being represented. Not always, but mostly see that kind of character being represented. Mm-hmm. No one gets that much exposure in terms of a stereotype of a black woman than the one that Tyler Perry puts forth. And I'm wondering, isn't there some responsibility for people who produce art, whether it's books or movies or poems or literature, to expand the breadth of the diversity of the community?
Well, I mean, I definitely agree with that, and that's what I think it goes to, the other movies that he does, where he actually shows, very positive portrayals of black women and their experiences. So I think, it's very hard to just pigeonhole him as, everything is kind of tied to Medea, when he's at this point created such a vast array of work and characters that includes those elements of, other aspects of what black women's experiences are.
I would just add with a major caveat that I haven't seen a lot of Tyler Perry's work. Just one film, and I can't even remember the name of that film. But I do think that if this is his particular vision, and although I would quarrel with what I've seen, that it's not up to us to be telling us what he should be exploring. If it is his desire to create characters that expand the breadth of, people's knowledge about, the Afro community, that's one thing. But if this is his particular oeuvre, if this is what he would like to, sort of work on, then that's, to me, artistically, that I don't agree with. Sorry, I disagree
with that.
Okay,
just
sure.
Let Essie finish your outro, and then I'll come to you. Just let her.
Okay. I think the problem is that we don't, as Kwame was saying, is that there aren't sort of other, other artists who are maybe as heavily promoted as him, as filmmakers, who are giving us these, giving us different views of what it means to be black.
Okay, Ato, go ahead there.
Well, I think I'll have to disagree with this proposition that if it is his artistic vision, we shouldn't, because there are two implications from that remark. One is that because he's a member of the community, he can do whatever he likes because it's his artistic vision. Then secondly, the more worrying implication is that if we cannot criticize one of our own merely because It is the artistic vision. They will have no business also criticizing white people who represent us badly, because it's their vision.
Well, I mean, I would disagree with that in the sense that I think we can, you know, critique and be very critical of what Tyler Perry does, but I do believe that if that is his vision, that is his vision, and the reality is people go out and watch it. If we were that critical and people were that offended and the people didn't see themselves in it, they wouldn't go. And the reality is people go because if it's not for Tyler Perry, where do you have to wait? Like, how long do you wait to see yourself in a movie? At least he is creating a void, filling a void where we don't see ourselves, period. So, you know, to some extent, you know, we get to go out to the movies and see Tyler Perry, but nobody else is making movies that tell any of our stories.
I agree with you, and that's why I also agree with Atto. Because if he is filling the void, and if that's the only place people are going to see themselves, and if he's going to end up on the Forbes list, then people are going to be starting to ask about some social responsibility. And that's why we're having the discussion. Now, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that some people will say, well, actually, no, he just needs to do his work, and that's what he does, and we can decide whether we go or not. I'm completely comfortable with the idea that he has a diverse portfolio, but only some bits of his portfolio are taken forward. But I also think that he makes work about the real world, and therefore he must understand the real world a bit. And he must know that there are certain things that are going to get mass circulation and are going to make money. And there are other things that are going to get small circulation and are going to be seen by very few people. And so in the real world, and what I get interested in is the fact that these sorts of things make a difference to people, to real people, to how they think about themselves and how they think about their futures. And that's why I'm interested in this sort of thing.
So let me pick up from what you're saying there, Quan, because I want to bring up another example. Director George Lucas has been, well, very vocal about the fact that he wasn't able to get funding for a film about African-American pilots during World War II. I think it's called Red Tails. On the other hand, we have movies like The Help, the very popular movie in the book that's out right now. So how come execs will buy The Help and won't buy a movie from George Lucas about African-American World War II pilots? Who wants to take that one? Donnie, try that. Okay, hold on. Gwen.
They're very, very different things. The Help has African-American women in it through the lens of a white American writer. That's what it is. So it's actually not really about African Americans. It's a bit like Armistead, which was a big slavery movie that Spielberg did, that was seen through the eyes of the white slave owners rather than Armistead's eyes.
Same with Invictus, done about a white rugby player in post-apartheid South Africa.
And it's the same thing again. And that is completely understandable, because, you know, there are some people who are making the movies and who are funding the movies, and their big audience happens to be people who have to identify, they think, with the main character, and people do identify via race.
So we need white people to make black movies?
No, we don't.
Tell black stories?
No, we don't.
Well,
but I'm just saying that, you know, that is, some people see that as one of the easiest ways of telling the stories. I don't think it's legitimate. I don't think it's needed. I think that sometimes people take the easy way because it makes them money.
But you are saying that those are the movies that are getting funded and being made. And I guess, Donna, that's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a huge issue for me. Actually, I met, is her name Catherine Stockett? Catherine, I can't remember the author of The Help. I met her. She's a really lovely woman. But then I got afraid to read the book because I thought, I'm going to be annoyed. I really like her. I just don't want to be annoyed. And I started, and I was getting annoyed, so I put it aside. And I haven't read it yet. And then there's another woman, I mean, there's many other women, but a particular woman that I think is a fine African-American writer. Her name is Bernice McFadden. And, you know, I'm seeing her really, really struggle to get a similar story. She has a story out right now, set in Jackson, Mississippi. Let's see how that goes. And what I'm saying is she has a very authentic voice. It's a very African-American perspective. And obviously, Ms. Stockett, you know, it annoys me. And caliber-wise, even though I really like this woman a lot, I'm a critic. So I can see that McFadden's work, in my eyes, is a stronger quality of work. But I know she'll never even come close to getting, she could never get that advance. She could never get that movie interest. And so, I think it's something that really distresses me, actually.
Essie, I want to ask you about your experience about producing stories about Black people. What's your experience been? Has it been a harder sell?
No, I wouldn't say that it has been. I would say that I feel like there's been really a great interest in these stories of, my first book was about, ex-slaves coming up from the States to homestead in the prairies of Alberta. And, you wouldn't think that this would be at all an attractive...
I'm from Saskatchewan. I find it very attractive.
Okay. But yeah, there seemed to be great interest in that subject matter. And again, with Half-Blood Blues, with the history of Blacks in the Third Reich, just a tremendously... great response to hearing from.
But don't you think in Canada, I think there's a distinction there that we are sort of more open to these stories, and I don't think the average African American author is feeling the same love from their publishers that we are starting. And I know a lot of people would even disagree that we're feeling that much, but I would say that that Black Canadian authors are more respected on the whole. Their stories are more accepted and more, they're getting better and more attention than African American authors are, unless your name is Toni Morrison or something like that.
Otto, jump in here because you're nodding your head.
I'm sort of, first of all, the help.
Here we go.
Yeah, I can see why there would be concern about, because there are definitely parts of the movie that are, unsatisfactory. However, I think we should be careful not to declare that white people or Chinese people or, Scandinavians, merely because they are not Black, cannot have access to a certain understanding of Black life. Because if we go down that route, it can also be told us that Black people cannot represent white folk.
I don't think anybody said that, though. I don't think anybody said that.
No, but there's an implication from what you said about the representation not being authentic. The word authentic raises red flags. Why is it not authentic? Because she's not part of the community.
No, hold on, I didn't say that. I'm speaking quite specifically. Now, I do a lot of reading, and it's my experience that quite frequently, white interpretation does fail quite frequently. But I don't want to say that.
Why? Why?
Why? I don't know. I don't know why it does, but I'm just saying that it does.
No, because you cannot just say it does. You have to tell us why it does.
Well, do you want a specific book? Okay, I'll tell you a specific book.
Yeah,
okay.
Tell us.
Okay, for example, I reviewed about a year ago a book by a gentleman named Ray Robertson, lovely writer, actually, a wonderful writer about a Black man, I guess around the turn of the century. I can't quite remember when it was set. But anyway, set in Chatham, Ontario, and set in one of those Black slave settlement communities. And how he portrayed it was that the gentleman, the lead character, the protagonist, was a wonderful, fantastic, brilliant man, and completely different from all the other people in the community. The other people in the community were like a flock of black sheep, and this, and yet this one. So we get this one special Black lifted out, and he's a special Black, which is a special Canadian thing. He's a special Black, and the rest of them are just like a undifferentiated mob. And so I said that, and I'm not saying I actually really like Ray Robertson's work, but yes, I came across this in Laurie Lanson's novel as well. I really want to say this. Can I?
I don't know. I don't know what you're going to say.
We'll find out. Laurie Lanson's had a book maybe 10 years ago now called Rush Home Road. She's a white Canadian woman. I wasn't even going to read the book, but I read this glorious review. So okay, I better read this book. So I read the book, and it seemed to me that she was once again removing this character from her community, but also
a black character.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, the characters seemed to me, I don't know, this, excuse me, but kind of freaky. So she went on then to write 2 other novels, and the 2 other novels feature a woman who is grotesquely or obese, and the other novel features a woman with 2 heads. So I had this feeling that she was already putting us in sort of a circus kind of category. But then this to me was sort of validated by the next, her books always have a peculiar woman. So a black woman, to her, fits into the woman with 2 heads. And so I'm saying that there's sometimes people don't even know why they're writing what they write, even us. But I think that's very true. Very often, white writers don't really know where they're coming from themselves. Not every time, but very often.
Okay. That's a tricky point to pick up on. But
I see the point that you are making, and basically it's in a way it's a discourse of exceptionalism. That is to say, these texts that you have just mentioned raise one black figure as exceptional, and the rest of the background is all a mass of undifferentiated blackness. However, this same exceptionalism, the exceptionalism of one kind of figure, is not that distant, even though it is quite different, is not that distant from the Tyler Perry thing, the discussion that we're having. Because what Tyler Perry has done is that he has raised one exceptional comedic figure to the point, and he's been very successful at it. So I see it's a delicate point. But the reason why I raised the concern earlier, well, I really don't think that just because someone is not in the community, they cannot. I agree that that's another point you're making, but it is possible to misunderstand what you said, to imply that people from beyond the community do not necessarily, just for the fact of, because the same point can be made against us. And as we all know, black people have written very sensitively about non-black people. So it's just a note of caution.
So Atto, I completely agree with you. It is possible for anybody possibly to write about anybody. But I also believe that I would find it difficult to write a credible female character. Okay? Men find it difficult. They try, and sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. It's just that it's more likely that you're going to get the voice right if you feel that in various different ways. But I think the main problem, and I think you keep on coming back to it and we keep on coming back to it, is the diversity. So when I first came to Toronto, I was looking for the black community and I didn't know where to find them. And when I did the reading in the newspaper or I looked on the TV, I still didn't know where to find them. And I didn't know where to find them because apart from the fact that I came at a time where there was a lot of gun crime and they said that it's all in the black community and don't go there, you never saw anything else. And, subsequently I've, bumped into the judges that we have that are black. I've come across the people who've been in Parliament who are black, the doctors who are black, part of the Black Physicians of Ontario. I've come across psychiatrists, social workers. This morning I was at a conference with the Toronto District School Board with all the black teachers and the people who are in the justice community. So I come across this huge diversity of the Toronto and the Ontario black experience. And one of the discomforts that I have sometimes with the Tyler Perrys and other things like that is that those stories don't get told and you don't see those stories. So when you're trying to build community and when you're trying to build the minds of youth so that they can see themselves in the world and move forward, they can't see any diversity. They can't see anything apart from a sports personality, a rapper, somebody who's involved in crime, or a Medea. They don't see that, and that's a problem.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Dwayne.
No, I just think
that's a good point, by the way.
Sorry, Ato, let's get Dwayne in.
No, I was just saying that it's a good point. I was just saying.
Okay, you
Thank
got
you.
to that point. From
We're just sharing the love. It's okay.
I think going with that point, and also going back to the original question about red tails and the help, I think, I believe that, in the society, a lot of times the black community are seen as the help. Even, with a black president in the United States, we are still seen as the help. So when you speak about sports figures, they're the help because there's somebody who has the money to pay the sports figures. And our young people all want to be the sports figures. No one wants to be the owner of the team because they don't even see that person as an option because we are the help. So when it comes to creating a film like this, it becomes easy to get funding for a film where we're the help because that is our position in society. People just see us all the time as the help. We don't know that the doctors exist, the judges exist, because where are those people, right? That we don't even know because the only time we see ourselves in the media is, we're on the news, we're in handcuffs. And these are the things and the images that our young people are seeing, so they have no clue as to what else they can do because these images aren't there.
And the images we mostly are presented are from America and often of the African-American narrative. And Essie, I want to ask you, Kwame mentioned this at the beginning, but how much as a black Canadian do you identify with the African-American narrative?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I would say I just wanted to maybe piggyback on what you're saying, or just to bring up another point. As a child growing up in the 80s in Calgary, constantly on TV for us was The Cosby Show. This was like a definitive show of my experience. And, he's a doctor and she's a lawyer. And this was...
But that was an exceptional one. That was some of the kudos that was paid to the show for breaking the stereotypes when it came out. I guess so, but maybe, obviously, Head in the Clouds, very naive. But this was something that was... very much, I guess, a huge role model for me. I never, thought that, I couldn't be a doctor or a lawyer or, or a writer, if this wasn't something where I ever felt held back by race. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just, having parents who very much made sure that we were exposed to, to things like The Cosby Show, or things where, it wasn't just that representation of, there's, like the Tyler Perry sort of representations that we're discussing, which, and so I think that that it, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to take, these particular models and embrace them. What does need to happen is that we need more models, that show the diversity of achievement. Are there enough models, Donna, in Canada of the black Canadian experience? The one that pops to my head is Trey Anthony's "The Kink in My Hair." That's the only one I can really, think of off the top of my head. But is there enough of it?
Well, obviously not. There's not enough. I mostly, I work with books mostly, so. And I do like theater as well. And so we do have some wonderful works. And we have Andrew Moody, who does wonderful theater. And we have Janet Sears, who has that outstanding play, Harlem Duet, which speaks so specifically to black Canadian experience. If I can just speak a little bit about Harlem Duet, it stars it's about a black Canadian woman whose father's name is Canada, actually. And she leaves and she goes to Harlem because and she's in love, and she wants that sense of community that we don't have here necessarily. So what it's about really is a black Canadian dream, which is about the States and what they have, that sense of community. So that's one experience. Another book, I'll let Essie speak to her own books, but there's another book that I'm thinking about, Chameleon Man, by a gentleman, Kim Brunhuber. You might know him. He's journalist, right? And he's written this wonderful book. It's been out a while, called Chameleon Man. It's mixed race. Mixed race is such an important experience in Canada, right? So it's about basically he's a lighter-skinned black man, and wherever this character goes, Stacy, his name is, he's treated differently. So so he kind of feels like he's a chameleon. He's changing everywhere he goes. But the truth is that people respond to you differently, different situations, different places, your brown skin has different meanings, so that's what that's about. And I think that's also very Canadian as well.
I want to ask about a very controversial book, Kwam, and I want to ask about, in Canada it was called Book of Negroes, it was retitled in the United States, Somebody Knows My Name. That little fact that it had to be retitled in the United States, what does that tell us about the difference between the Black Canadian experience and the Black American experience?
Well, I think that there is no way on earth you can get a book of... It's never going to be called the Book of Negroes in America. It's
about slavery in Canada.
It's not possible.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there are different ways you can talk. Obviously, in America, with 13% of the population and a politicized 13%, and you just can't get away with that sort of language. Can I just say something really quickly, because I loved your comment. I loved your comment because your comment was about the importance of getting into somebody's fantasy life and how that changes who they think they can be, and the fact that the Crosby Show got into your fantasy life and you thought, well, I can do anything here. I mean, it's on TV, and it's not them saying you can do anything. It's that you are allowed to do anything because you can see on TV that it's completely possible. Mm-hmm. So, sorry about that.
Nice compliment to Essie.
Sorry?
Nice compliment to Essie.
Well, she can do anything. But, the important thing is that fantasy life. And I remember in the UK, and they have it here as well, Doctor Who. And Doctor Who, when they remade Doctor Who, the first Doctor Who was going to die off. And Doctor Who, as you know, is a fictional character who's supposed to be from Gallifrey. And Gallifrey doesn't exist, but the Doctor changes all the time. So when that Doctor died, a few of us wrote an article, I wrote in the Times, and we said, why can't that new Doctor be black? Because actually the Doctor had been anything from dark-haired Mediterranean to white Aryan. And we said, there's actually no reason why it can't be black. This went off into the net, and the geneticists got involved in it, and the geneticists said, yeah, even though we don't know what the Gallifrey human genome looks like, he could definitely be black. And so this caused a real problem for the BBC, because there was actually no reason why Doctor Who couldn't be black, apart from in their own fantasies. Mm-hmm. And in their own fantasy, the Doctor was white and was a man. But actually, genetically, the Doctor could be anything. I mean, wind forward very quickly, what actually happened was they couldn't bring themselves to have a black Doctor Who, but they rang up somebody who had not been cast in a minor role, rang her up out of the blue, and she was a black woman, and said, could you be the Doctor's help as a medical student? Mm-hmm. And so in the next series, they had a black medical student as a Doctor's help, which was an interesting fact that this fantasy is very important and is very strong with regards to our motivation for what we think is possible and what we think is not possible.
We have just about 2 minutes left. Go ahead, Atto.
Yeah, the same can be said about James Bond, the James Bond franchise. For some incredible reason, they've still not cast, in fact, they have not cast any race for the hero apart from a white man. They're very good Chinese actors. They're good black actors who could, because James Bond's role is not a white role. It's not a role that you need to be white before you can kill people and use fancy gadgets. So just to support what has just been said, there's certain roles that for some reason it is imagined by the industry that this role must be white, but there's nothing in the role itself that ties it to whiteness.
Okay, we're going to have to leave there. Thank you, Atto from New York, joining us. Atto Kwesen, professor of English, and thank you everyone here around the table. Essie Adujan, author of the Giller Prize-winning Half-Blood Blues. I'll get it right, I'm sorry. Dwayne Morgan, poet and founder of Up From the Roots Entertainment. Next to him, Donna Bailey-Nurse, who's a literary journalist and author of What's a Black Critic to Do. And on my right-hand side, Kwam McKenzie of the U of